Welcome everyone to our second afternoon of iDay 2020. I hope you were able to join us yesterday and this morning. We really kicked things off well. It really is a distinct pleasure that I get to introduce Pat Sabarito. Pat may not realize, but I've probably known her and followed her at least over the past decade through other associations. And there's no one that I think that can speak better to the topics of data and analytics literacy. Um, few housekeeping items. This is a session designed for continuing education. There will be polls administered throughout. So in order to obtain the credit, we do require participation. The chat is open and active. Pat will try to follow along. If not, she'll address your questions towards the end of the session. And we can always open up the lines then. So without further ado, Pat, I'll hand things off to you.
Thanks a lot, Rich. And welcome everybody. I hope you had a good lunch. Let me go down. So, it's really my pleasure to present this, and this has become a huge topic, the whole topic of data and analytics literacy. Certainly nobody works in our industry without being, having data and analytics capabilities. Really what we're talking about is what's the degree of data and analytics literacy that you have and how do you improve it. And by the way, I've incorporated some slides in here, and I'll talk a bit more about this from some programs that I've recently launched. You'll see on the right-hand side of the screen my book, Applied Insurance Analytics, which I wrote in I guess it was released in 2014. And actually it was quite amusing. I turned around and I realized it had been translated into Chinese. It's like, really? Okay. There was demand for the book in China. And subsequently, I've actually gone to China and delivered met with various Chinese insurance companies. The next stage for this is I've actually developed an e-learning course as a companion to the book, which updates some of the content in the book. And so just that's an FYI for you. You can take a look. This will be in the slide deck. As Rich says, he's known me from various organizations. One of the organizations we're mutually been engaged in is the Insurance Data Management Association. I'm also past president of the Society of Insurance Research and of APIW, which is a professional insurance women's organization. You can see more about, you can take a look at this later, but my background, I come out of the business side. My background is really claims. Originally, I segued, as I call it, to the dark side of IT as a business analyst and business systems architect. And then I really went to the dark side by working for software vendors. And I say that teasingly because I'm very proud to have worked both for Teradata and SAP. Currently, I'm an advisor and mentor at the Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken. They have a master's program in data and analytics. And I'm a mentor also for the Global Insurance Accelerator, where I really enjoy working with the startups. And in the past, I've been an advisor with the International Institute for Analytics, which was co-founded by, the real guru of analytics, Tom Davenport. So I've had the pleasure of actually meeting and working with him. So let's move on. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about, really what I think 5 key elements to data and analytics literacy. And my hope is that you improve what I would call your data and analytics IQ, right? We're going to talk about what data-driven really means. There's a lot of buzz around that, and a lot of it is, I'll call it more jargon than reality. So we'll define what does data-driven really mean, and how does data literacy fit into that. So we'll look at some core data and analytics concepts. We'll look at something that I call the applied analytic framework, because we really want to make sure that the analytics that we are exploring and defining are truly actionable. So I really should call that the actionable analytic framework as well as being applied. I've got a couple of use cases in here that I'll use. There's one from an underwriting perspective, and another I used for sales. I know there may be some producers on joining us today as well. And then lastly, we'll talk about the future of analytics. What does it hold and how can you be prepared for the future? So if we take a look at the digital economy, right? We're truly living in a connected age, and it is truly connected by data supply and demand both. It's our world's both digital and networked. And if you look from the left-hand side, just a pure aspect of data growth, the data growth just does not cease, right? It just keeps on coming. And I don't know about you, but I had to look up what the heck a zettabyte was because it was beyond my math skills. Probably not beyond some of the actuaries that might be here, but certainly beyond my simple math skills. But we're talking about 33 times data growth. And what does that mean, and what's the impact of that? It's really enabling advanced analytics, because when we get into AI, it really takes a lot of data, right, in order to train those models and to find new opportunities and new findings, if you will. The second part of this is the connectivity piece, and this number is dated now, 212 billion things. And so those things, now we're talking about IoT, right? It's not just your phones, it's all of the devices, everything literally for all of us in most of our homes are connected, right? And that facilitates smart processes and smart ecosystems, right? We start to think of ecosystems. As we continue on to the right, bringing this more specifically to insurance, 43% of insurers plan to or have acquired innovators or startups. So I shared, my experience, a little bit of my experience with the Global Insurance Accelerator, and there are obviously a number of those kinds of programs, both for insurance and related, industry-related areas. And what's happening is the companies are innovating their business processes and products. Clearly, no one can do everything by themselves. This stuff is moving really fast, right? It's hard to keep up with it. It's impossible for any one company to basically make the investments and just execute on them. So it's not just putting the money in; it's actually being able to execute on them. And then to the right of this, we're talking about, now we get to talking about partnerships, right? So we're looking at really new distribution partnerships. The traditional agent will never go away, agent or broker. There's a very clear and distinct need for that, that kind of expertise. But there are, other ways to connect the distribution system for insurance. And so it's not just, there are new partners, and frankly, the producers may become some of those partnerships, right? So again, we're talking about a network. It's not just a point to point, from the customer to the producer to the insurance company and or, ultimately on to the reinsurer. And there are new channels as well, right? People want to interact the way they want to interact. Some of that is direct and some of it is intermediated. So let's talk about data-driven decisioning. What does that mean? It's easy to say it. A lot of companies claim to be data-driven. They highlight it in their annual report. They, in their CEO letter as part of the annual report and many other places. But are they just talking the talk, or are they really walking the walk? That's the key question here. Are they putting this to practice? So when an organization puts it to practice is when they use data and analytics to truly drive actions or deliberate inaction, right? So not taking an action, is not necessarily, a deliberate action. But if you study the data and you decide not to do something for a specific reason, that's as valid as taking a specific action. So let's talk, data-driven organizations they use data to make decisions versus justifying decisions, because a lot of people will use the data, they will actually come back, they've already made up their mind, and now let me go find the data to back up my decision, right? Well, that's not really what we want to do, right? So the question is, are you relying on facts, or are you relying on your intuition or your gut? And I kind of like this little logo here, "In God we trust, everybody else bring data," right? That's what it's all about. So we're in the fourth industrial revolution with the digital era, if you will. And you can see we've been through four. We're in the fourth phase here. In the 1700s, it was the steam you will, evolution. It was all about mechanization, about steam power, about, you know, the looming technology, all pun intended here, was the loom, right? In the 1800s, it was all about electricity. Think about Tesla, right? Think about Edison. Mass production, think about, you know, Ford, right? You can have any car you want as long as it's black. So mass production, the assembly line, and electrical energy was what was driving everything in the 1800s. As we moved into the 1900s, it was all about computing, right? The first computers, I can actually admit that I do remember punch cards. I had this discussion with a group of friends recently, and we were all laughing about this. You know, how about the first computer? Some of you, you know, are probably quite young and can't even relate to this, but, you know, the first computers, or personal computers, if you will, certainly we had mainframes around, but the first personal computers that were around, and it was all about electronics, right, in the 1900s. But here we are today in the connected era, and it's cyber physical, right? Everybody's concerned about cyber, you know, about cyber liability, cyber risk. It's all about artificial intelligence, and because of that connectivity we talked about, so AI, because of the data, and IoT generating some of that data from all of those connected devices. And a perfect example of this era is the autonomous vehicles, right? And certainly, you know, the jury's, you know, out on some of that. There are clearly risks associated with that, and whether it's programming risk because they're, you know, autonomous, think about the professional liability related to that. Just to kind of talk about a little bit about some of the industries, Airbnb, right? So talking about things, what is the digital, you know, what's the digital revolution all about? We're the world's largest accommodation provider. You can call it a hotel if you want. You can call it, you know, whether it's a B&B or whatever. Owns no real estate, right? So it's all about facilitation. It's not about owning. So you're owning the channel and the relationship. You don't own the physical assets, basically. Netflix, I'd love to see what the numbers on Netflix have been since COVID, right? It's a terrible time, but, you know, people have clearly tried to remain entertained. Movie theaters, movie houses, I think, were a thing of the past. You can read the news yourself and see how many of those chains are going bankrupt. But even before this, I used this slide, you know, and prior to COVID, talking about this, where, you know, it's one of the largest entertainment channels, right? Owns no theaters, right? Uber, you know, Uber, Lyft, you know, pick your choice of, rideshare services, right? Where no vehicles are owned. So again, it's about the network, right? It's about the relationship. So let's bring it more specifically to insurance. So when we talk about data-driven, one of the companies I love to talk about, and I had the privilege to go visit, is Discovery South Africa. They're based in Johannesburg, and they're fascinating company. This was and I visited them, must be 3.5 years ago or so. And I remember going in to talk to the gentleman who was in charge of business intelligence there. In fact, he was a former SAP person, and talking to him about what they were doing with algorithms and with their models at the time. And I was blown away by the number of models that they were running, because it's not just running the models. You know, clearly what you have to do is then take a look at them and see what the impact of the models are and recalibrate them. You know, so it's maintaining the models, and some of that can be automated, but some of it can't. What Discovery South Africa I guess, depending on your, depending on if you're British or not and want to use that term, have or has, they have a program called Vitality. And there were 3 key elements to it. There is the Vitality Health Program for health insurance. And they talk about being rewarded for living well. The Vitality Drive program, right, is part of their, you know, P&C arm, right, or they would call general insurance. So getting rewarded for quote unquote driving well. And Vitality Money program, which is part of their banking. They have a bank as part of their organization as well, getting rewarded for banking well. And when you take a look at this, you see that behind all of this is all these behavioral models and trying to incent the consumer, regardless of whether it's health. So what they, and the health side, they have all kinds of, like they have, will have fitness apps. So not only do they have the apps to monitor your behavior, but they've also embedded incentives into the program to have you modify your behavior and to buy into it and provide you with discounts. At the end of the day, we know what they're doing. They're improving the risk, right? That's essentially what they're doing. And it's very customer, I would say, life cycle centric. They're really, number one, I really like that they're looking at the whole customer, right? They look at the whole customer and they're looking at the customer life cycle. So I encourage you, there is a link in here, and I really encourage you to go in and take a look at the portal. There is a video that attached to them, and you'll see them for each of the programs where a customer is talking about what they do. So for example, in the auto program, making it more relevant for those of us on the line here, it's not just having the black box to monitor your actual behavior, braking behavior, miles driven, et cetera. But they actually provide discounts on the tires, right? They provide discount on a ride share service, so that you're not driving when you shouldn't be, right? So if you've had a couple of drinks, right, you don't want to drive, right? Ideally, we shouldn't be driving, but they reinforce all of that. So I encourage you, like I said, this is a great example, and I could come up with I could share others, but this is the one I've elected to share today. So what are some of the traits of data-driven organizations? Well, they align their analytics priorities to their strategic business vision and initiatives, right? So it's not, so when we say they're data-driven, yeah, they're data-driven because they get what they can do with the analytics to support, what they want to do in the business. They embed the analytics into decision making and into the workflows, right? So this is walking the walk, right? This is really walking the walk. They also developed advanced data analytics assets, so like data lakes, right? So talk about all kinds of experimental capabilities so that they can play with the data. They're not going to invest all the money in, I'll call it industrializing some of the data, because it's not production, right? Some of this isn't necessarily production data. They're playing with it, right? It's a test and learn environment. That's some of the things that they invest in. Obviously other data that really needs to be finely curated because it's involved in, regulatory reporting or something is another story, right? They also handle that. But then they also invest in the team. So whether that's the data scientists, et cetera, which comes down to the critical analytics role. So they've got a chief analytics officer, and we'll talk later about some of the roles. I get less wrapped around the axle of what you call somebody. I like to know what they own and what they're responsible for. Am I the chief analytics officer? Am I the chief data officer, right? I just want to know what the responsibility is. And then the data, the data scientists, and we'll talk about the citizen data scientists, meaning you and me. And last but not least, they're enabling this evolution, right, of their employees and democratization, right? Meaning, that we are the citizen data scientists. It's not trying to make you into a data scientist. It's helping you do your job better using and leveraging the data and analytics, right? And helping to support you with evolving your skills and the appropriate tools, et cetera, and training. So given that background, I put this slide up. I love this slide. Actually, it was developed by one of my peers at SAP, Timo Elliott, who's very talented. And I invite you, you'll see his URL here, timoelliott.com. He's got a bunch of really fun, he's an extremely creative and vibrant person, and he's extremely talented in creating his own cartoons on top of everything else. So are your decisions data-driven or hippo-driven? What's a hippo? The highest important paid person, right? So a hippo is the highest paid person's opinion. And Rich, let's take a poll here. So my question for you is, are your organization's decisions data-driven or hippo-driven? And we'll see how many participate, and let's see what the numbers come out to. Okay, data-driven is taking the lead. It was different before. It kind of shifted a little. It's kind of fun to see the numbers shift. Okay, well, good. It says the majority here. We've got 20 people on the call, and 85% are data-driven, and 15% are hippo-driven. Maybe it's shifting a little. Okay, all righty. So it's interesting. Thanks for sharing that, and we'll see some other things. We'll take some other polls later. Okay, and there, Rich, there you go. You got the final numbers. Thanks. Do I need to share the results, or you've already shared them? I think you have, Rich. Okay. Okay, we can close the poll then, and we can. Okay. All right. I don't know if I get to. I'll just close it, Rich, or minimize it. Okay, there we go. All right. All righty, so there we took that poll. So let's take a look at this. So data-driven decisioning, it follows a process, and I'll say it's a model here. Let's say that there are 5 elements to it. The first is defining your objectives, right? So defining your business problem or objective, setting boundaries on the objective, and creating a hypothesis, right? So that's step 1, right? Next thing we do is we take a look at the data, identifying the data that we want to use, and maybe even identifying the data that we have. We'll talk more about that. And the data that we'd like to have, maybe we can find proxies for the data. Maybe we can augment the data, right? Those are some things that we would look at as part of this process. We're going to look at the quality of the data, and I will make a comment here that sometimes what people perceive as being a data quality issue is a data understandability issue. And that's a topic for another day, but we'll talk about metadata and how well documented your data is, and how available that documentation is to the business user, not just to IT, right? It's not just about the technical metadata, it's about the business metadata as well. And last but not least, in the data preparation, right? So how is that data prepared? How is it to be used for the modeling, right? So that's the next steps, our analysis and modeling, and we could use a variety of data analytics techniques. It's picking the most appropriate one. And then taking a look at both descriptive and predictive models, because there's a place for both, right? And the next, so we've done our modeling. Now we want to, look at the insights from the models that we've developed, whether it's trends, relationships, behaviors, looking at specific events, maybe dependencies. And last but not least, here we go to the whole point of it all, which is making actionable decisions, right? In various areas, whether it's marketing, pricing, underwriting, fraud management, claims, loss control, etc. So this is a good time to talk about this. The whole point of analytic maturity is that it doesn't happen in one fell swoop. Let's take a look at this as a continuum. So if we look on the left-hand side of the slide, we're looking at, I guess what I would call pretty much reactive, a reactive approach to analytics, or reactive analytics. And it starts at the most basic level with, if the most basic level is getting your data, but presuming we've got that, now we're looking at standard and ad hoc reports, maybe developing some dashboards. And that's fairly, I would say fairly static, although I realize obviously the dashboards can be dynamic. But then getting to data exploration and visualization. So especially the data exploration part is extremely important. And I'm also trying to overlay here with some of the roles that are like, who are the users of these? So it would be the consumer or casual consumer for the most part. As we move a bit more to the right, we get into advanced visualization and predictive analysis. And I also think of this in terms of questions. So when we're looking at the most reactive stuff, we're looking at the past, what happened, right? As we move a bit more to the right in the advanced visualization and the predictive analysis, we're trying to find the why. Why did this happen? And as we move into the proactive part, we're now going into predictive modeling and saying what could happen next. And ultimately what we want to get to is what's the best that could happen and how do we make that happen, right? And then at that point we're using, our data scientists and developers for that. In between, when we're taking a look at some of the advanced visualization and some of the predictive analysis, the super user or power analysts are engaged. So if you take it down to the bottom, I'll just kind of answer those questions. I'll give an example about sales. So the what might be, an observation that our sales are down, and trying to look at it. What are we observing? Well, new business close rates down. And our open sales head count is, we have a large open sales head count. Well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to make some derivation, derive some observations from that, right? But some of the why, it might be because there's a price increase. Some of these might just be coincidental, right? What else is happening? We had a recent price increase, and we've had aggressive sales by a competitor, in fact, who is probably recruiting some of our salespeople, which is why we've got an open sales headcount. And what could happen next? Well, we could decrease prices. That's one observation to counteract this. We could appoint more sales reps. We can do other things. I'm not going to go through this with you logically. You can come to your own thoughts about some techniques you could use in terms of incentives to keep and retain your sales reps as well. And then lastly, what's the best that could happen? We want the best price point for each product in each region, right? That's really, ultimately what we'd like to do. So this is a simple way of kind of trying to take a look at this chart. And the reality is that this isn't one single view for your enterprise, right? There are going to be different parts of your enterprise, like, the actuarial area, who's going to be very sophisticated, right? You might have some areas of your enterprise, I'll pick on HR, that may be less sophisticated, frankly, in terms of being able to look in and analyze some of the data, right? Or do some of the analytics on it. They're able to analyze the data probably, but perhaps they don't have access to some of the tools and the training. So I'm just using it as an illustration. Again, I'm not saying that all HR departments are like that, or even that any of them are, but just as a generalization. But being data-driven, becoming data-driven certainly has challenges, right? And there are four big, key areas here. I would say the most significant one is around the people. It's about, upskilling people, making sure they've got the skills in place. And more so, it's about the culture. If your organization has always done things one way, or if you're very driven by, almost a dictatorial sort of big personality within the organization, right? Then it's very hard to evolve to a different culture. And a big part of it is change management. How do you change people's behavior? How do you incent them? So, people are a huge part of it. Processes are important, in particular governance. I use data governance here, but there's also analytics governance as well, and the standards. So having best practices and guidelines, having them documented, available to people. And we're going to talk more about the concept of a business analytics competency center and helping to facilitate the processes and the communication. The technology, frankly, is the least, I would say is probably the least difficult part of this. The databases are out there, the tools are out there, the environment's out there. You can buy this stuff. And I'm not saying that it doesn't cost money and that there's not complexity, but I'm saying this is probably the least challenging. And lastly, as we take a look at the data, it's about the data access, the timeliness of the data, the quality, and the relevancy, right, of the data. So now that we've looked at this, let's take a look at within your organization, which of the areas do you face your greatest challenge in, is with regard to being data driven? Okay, kind of interesting. Got one that's technology. I think we've still got a few more people voting. We've got about 65% of our attendees participating. Why we give people another minute. We can stop it at the minute, Rich. Oh, wait, there's a few more coming in. Okay. He's ready to cut them off. Okay, we had about 80%. Okay, so number one is people, as suspected. In the process, not surprisingly to me, I frankly would have expected data to be number three instead of the technology. So that's kind of interesting. So. And maybe people can, in the chat, it would be interesting if you can, of course, once you listen to the presentation, but you can add your comments in the chat. We can come back and we'll look at it at the end as well. So not just your questions, but some of your comments you can include in the chat, okay? Okay, thanks, Rich. And I'll just minimize that. Okay. Oops. Yep, there we go. Okay, so there are corporate data cultures, as well to be looked at. So when we're talking about culture overall, we're talking about, and I'm specifically talking about data cultures, not just your analytics culture, because I think we talked a bit about that evolution, which kind of alludes to the culture. But the first one is a data dictatorship, and this is where the data is rigidly controlled and severely restricted, right? So there's like my data, right? I am the keeper of the keys, and I will decide who gets it. The data aristocracy is really almost an elitism. Yes, you can have the data, but only if you are one of us, right? Data scientist, a statistician, a PhD. So the power and the use of the data is very concentrated. The first one is where it's just extremely restricted overall. The second one is access is provided, but it's very restricted and concentrated. The data anarchy, well, I'll talk about the data democracy next. This is what really everybody wants, right? Getting the data that they need and should have access to. Where the business is empowered and quote unquote, I'll say owns the data, and we know that the organization owns the data, no one individual, but there is responsibility, and we'll talk about a little bit about data stewardship, right? So this is what I call data nirvana. This is the ideal state. And then lastly, the data anarchy, right? And this, what happens in a data anarchy, this is where the business users take control. They take data into their own hands because they're being impacted by that data dictatorship or data aristocracy. So this is when you have data marts spreading up like gophers all over the place. And they've got shadow IT teams, they don't trust their central IT organization. They're taking charge. So let's take a look, and we're going to do, believe we're going to do another poll here, right? So which of the following best describes, given what we just discussed, which of the following best describes your data culture? Okay. Ooh, we got some data aristocracy going on here. Okay. Let's see. We'll get a little bit more. Only about 60% of you have voted. And hopefully you understand maybe I gave a good enough explanation of what those are. But I'm kind of pleased to see, and Rich will share this in a minute. We'll go up to the minute mark, and we'll give it a few more seconds for people to add in if they wish. Okay, Rich, I think it's good. Okay, so interesting, kind of a tie here for the data aristocracy amongst the elite and the data democracy. So it's interesting. So some of you do have a data democracy, which is great. A few of you do have the data dictatorship. I suspect, frankly, a lot more of you have some data anarchy going around, maybe on a departmental basis, but that's okay. It's your opinion, and that's fine. Thanks, Rich. So what I talked earlier about, what's this data literacy thing, right? You know, I'm literate, clearly. You know, I can write, I can do numbers. You know, I'm not only am I, reading literacy, but I also am numerically literate, right? Well, data literacy is the ability to read, work with, analyze, and argue with data. So it focuses on the competencies involved in working with the data. And if you get a chance later, you can click on these links later and read a little bit more about it. But this is a big deal. It's a big deal, frankly, in the education system. So it really, and obviously if people are in, it's not enough just to be in kind of computer science program. Let me put it that way. That's fine that you can program. Can you actually argue with the data, right? Can you put it to use? And so there are a number of elements that are really relevant to the data and information literacy. I ran a program for a bank at the beginning of the year, and I'm talking about a national bank. I went in and ran a one-day, actually it was 2 days, and it was 2 sessions. I ran a 2-phase program for them on data and analytics literacy. And it was for a mid-tier management in various areas, customer service. There were some of the lending plan for. Some of them were more sophisticated areas like risk management and finance. And we went through, you know, a lot of the similar content we talked about, obviously in much more detail than we're doing in this webinar today. And then I provided them with the tool that I'm going to share with you, and it had them go back and reframe some of their business objectives in terms of using the tool and thinking about how they would use the data. And then they went through defining that, and we came back as a group and reviewed those. And the net of that was they felt that they definitely improved their literacy and their ability to think more analytically, and not only that, but to lead the people who reported to them. So it wasn't just about them; it was about the staff who reported to them as well, and their peers, how they interacted with their peers. So this can have a profound impact. And here are some of the things that it's talking about. So some of this, the data information literacy, yes, of course, it's about the data. We just talked about this. And yes, it's about the analytics, but it's about critical thinking. It's how you analyze, you know, evaluate and infer things from the data, how you apply it. And we talked about elements of this earlier, the fact versus intuition, how you present the data, and something, the storytelling. And there's a fabulous book. I won't be able to think of this woman's name because she has a very unique last name, but the name of her book is called Storytelling with Data, and it's extremely well written. It's a business book. It's not a technical book. I'll maybe put that out there later as a follow-on. It's about culture, which we've talked about. So it's not just about the governance and change management. It's about leadership, and we're going to talk about leadership a bit later. And it's also about curiosity. You can't make people curious. They either have it or they don't, right? You can nurture it, but you can't make somebody curious who just isn't curious by nature, right? It requires people being open-minded. It requires them to be able and willing to think differently, and not accepting the status quo. And I find, to me, the curiosity is somewhat, it's a counterbalance and it's a complement to the critical thinking, is the best way I can describe it. So what are some of the key data analytics skills? So I said if those were kind of capabilities, if you kind of bring them together, the first one is business requirements and data. So defining and interpreting the business requirements is absolutely critical. And again, I'm going to share this tool that'll help you do that. And understanding and transforming the data, right? When I say transforming the data, I mean making it fit for the business problem that you're trying to solve. Then we're going into the visualizations. So it's design, building, and using your visualizations. And this assumes that you're doing some modeling as part of this, right, in the visualizations. and interpreting the visualizations. And then the last part is the results, getting results from what you've prepared. So analyzing it, acting on it, and sharing the results. This is from my book, but this is something that I've used for many years. I use this with the SAP clients in insurance and in many industries, talking about having an enterprise analytics perspective really an effective enterprise analytics capabilities requires both strategy and execution. And I use this triangle going from your business strategy to your analytics strategy to your data strategy. On the left, you see, this wheel saying the strategy, and it's got 5 key elements here. It's all about alignment. You're seeing a roadmap here because you can't do it all at once. So, some of this was the objectives and scope, defining those business needs, assigning a business value because you're going to need funding. And you want to bring back and reinforce what you're able to achieve. You need that funding to make the investments in data and technology and, of course, people. And then your organization and governance, right? You need to be organized for success and you need to govern this. So that's the strategy, but strategy without execution, doesn't go anywhere, right? So the execution part of this is what are the capabilities you have? So when we talk about, the data quality, et cetera, the data stewardship is absolutely critical. So are your advanced analytics capabilities, and so are your, I'm laughing, I'm losing part of my, my screen. I'm going to, bear with me a second. I need to go to paper. It's also the overall program management for your analytics, and it's the education and support. So those are the elements you have. And one of the things I talk about here is what's really important is that business analytics competency center. It's an organization. It's very small, very focused, that basically is the glue between the strategy and the execution. And it is the go-between IT and the business. So when we talk about that, I'm not going to go through all this in detail, but those 5 areas that I talked about previously, you can see here what some of the sub-elements are on your objectives and scope. The business needs, looking at, current versus future needs, your priorities and alignment. The value measurement or business value, it's not just the original business case that you come up with, but it's post-implementation going back and defining and documenting the business value that was attained. Your information structure and technology, since some of you said technology was one of your challenges, being able to look at that for your applications architecture, maybe some of and I guess it depends on what your state of your digital transformation is. That may be some of the issues that you're dealing with and being able to get to the data. I typically am thinking about performance generally in terms of the database itself and of the models to be able to run. But it also involves your data modeling, meaning what is not just the physical modeling of your data and how it's stored, but what is the business relationship of the data, right? How does the data tick and tie to one another from a business perspective? And then we've already hit on the organization and governance, but again, I'll talk about the roadmap because it doesn't happen all at once. It happens over a period of time. So it's important to know where you are, what your gaps are, how to prioritize, addressing those gaps and laying out that roadmap to do it. So I mentioned I was going to talk about leaders and leadership being so important. And I playfully listed these hats on the right-hand side and tried to maybe explain at least my view of what the roles are. So the Chief Analytics Officer, where he or she is really solving business problems with the data. The Chief Data Officer really is ensuring the data viewed as a key corporate access, right? Potentially less focused on the business problems, and of course they're focused on the business problems, but less application oriented, I would say, more so about the data. The Chief Data Science Officer, creating those really sophisticated, right, data models. And the Chief Digital Officer, which is certainly a compliment. If you haven't digitized your data and your business processes, it makes it rather hard to to be able to leverage the data. And that may be one of the things that some people were alluding to when they mentioned earlier that the biggest challenge was technology. But this executive sponsorship is something at a C level. As I said, I get less hung up on what you call these titles, people's names. What I want to know is what they do. What are they responsible for? And someone may be responsible for more than one, right? There may be a role that owns both the analytics and the data, and that's fine. So it's a C-level person. That person is a champion. He or she champions the need for analytics and the business value, right, of the end result and the application of the analytics. And he or she communicates with their peers at that C level. They're usually on the management team, the senior management team. They've got access to that. And again, this is all about funding and visibility. Often I go in here, I didn't put a poll in here, but I typically, and you're welcome to include in the chat, do you have a chief analytics officer? It's not the CIO and it's not the CTO, okay? It's not the CISO, the chief information security officer. It's none of those three, okay? So I'd be very interested if you put in your chat if you have a chief analytics officer, a chief data officer, the chief data science officer, or maybe you've got another role. You can put that in the chat. We'll look at it later. Let's take a look at this, the analytics approach being outcomes versus data. So it's very easy to look at the data first and then try to work backwards. And I would encourage you not to do that because you're constraining your analysis. You might think it's very pragmatic. I would encourage you to start with the business problem first and then then look at the potential data and then work into the data you have. Because the other thing is if you look at the data you have, it's like the data looking for a problem. Do you know what I'm saying? You can overanalyze and you can get stuck in analysis paralysis here. So I use the example here of, the hammer, right? If the only tool you have is a hammer, right? Then, you're looking for this, you're looking at, your nails, your solution, right? Just a little bit about the Business Analytics Competency Center. And again, I don't care what you call it. Some other people often call it, they may call it a center of excellence. In my experience, when people talk about centers of BI Center of Excellence or Analytics Center of Excellence, they're really talking about the IT organization and the development team. This is much more business oriented. And again, it's talking about the program management. It looks at advanced analytics. It looks at the data stewardship. It often facilitates or works with the data governance council and is very often responsible for the education and support, in particular of the end business users. So it's all about making sure the best practices are documented, they're communicated, and they're adhered to and evolve, right? If new things need to be added, then they're added. Now I have a question for you. Do you have a business-oriented, right? Not just a COE, an IT COE. Okay. Okay, let's see what we got here. So far, the majority is no, but we have some. And we'll give it another few seconds. I think we've probably got, oh no, got a couple more weighing in, great. Okay, here we go. So 2/3 of you do not and 1/3 do. And of course, the next key question is, what's the level of maturity of your Business Analytics Competency Center, right? And where are you trying to go with that? So for those of you who don't have one, what I often tell people is, frankly, you probably have a number of these elements in place. The reality is that they're probably not well documented and organized, and so that can be taken care of, right? That would be an initiative, and frankly, it is a critical success factor for your data and analytics literacy. Let's talk about self-service analytics, because this is what we're getting to, right? People are doing their own analytics. And I draw this comparison here. So see this where you're being served with the wine and cheese, and I don't know what else is in here. Maybe potato chips, maybe something nicer. Where you've got development services, meaning that your analytics are IT authored. And the reason why you have them is because there's complexity. Or maybe you've got standardized reports, so it shouldn't just be kind of a one-off that you're sharing. Or you want, for whatever reason, to create the creation of those analytics from the consumption or the, by the end user, or whoever that may be, right? So the self-service is the power users, right? This is where people can do, and you see the types of analytics in the colored bars here. So data discovery is certainly, it's a self-service capability largely, right? When you start to get into dashboards and the applications, some of that is self-service and some of it really requires IT to participate, again, because it might be standardized reports, or it might require very sophisticated data mashups or specific data governance. The reporting can go either way. So you'll see on the bottom, we've got the buffet, right? The little, the little table, buffet table or catering table on the bottom. So, and typically the power users are the business analyst, a system analyst, or maybe even an executive. I've seen some very sophisticated, some executives who can, do some power analytics on their own, and not just actuaries, by the way, or marketing people. So typically the self-service analytics are, exported to Excel or PDF. And of course, there's a number of self-service analytic tools are out there, and you pick your tool of choice, right? Is it Click? Is it Tableau? Is it there's a number of them. Certainly, I have to throw in SAP slash business objects. All of the usual players, and often these are mobile or web-based self-service. So, but to have self-service analytics and to do it effectively, you still need, so just so we talked about the Business Analytics Competency Center, and frankly, some of these might be facilitated by the Business Analytics Competency Center. You need a data bureau. So we talked earlier about making sure that people have access to the data that they need. So having one-stop shopping for the data, right? Whether it's internal, external, what we call wrangled data, which is kind of combined and mashed up data. A tools bureau, because one tool, even though we talked about Click or Tableau or the self-service tools, or I neglected to mention things like SAS or some of the predictive modeling tools. And often many of those tools have some fairly, I'll say pre-configured models in them. But it's making sure that the end user has the right tool for what they're trying to do. The sandbox, we talked a little bit about that earlier. So if you want to play with things, whether it's with a data set or a particular tool, or maybe it's a database or something, having that sandbox is very important. Some innovation capabilities, there's a number of techniques, innovation techniques. There's also challenges. So if you're trying to solve a problem and you want to come up with some models, laying out a challenge like, an analytic challenge contest or something is one way to do it. And then lastly, analysis validation, right? So at the end of the day, if something's going to go into production or something gets very sophisticated, you need to have the capability to analyze, and validate the analysis. Just pointing some of those out. So now we get to, working effectively together, right? So it takes a village, and we talk a little bit about, data scientists, as talented as they are, can't work alone, right? They need to work with the business users and vice versa. So I'm just trying to illustrate here, the business users are usually expert on the business, they understand the business problem. Where data scientists, and you may come up with the, recommended data sets. Your data scientists, are experts on data, but they also can come up with additional and external data sets, give you feedback on some, maybe some issues in your data. The hypotheses, it always helps to start with the hypotheses, the good business hypotheses. And then your data scientists can basically, analyze it, give you feedback, and maybe recommend other approaches. And then it's about the business users reviewing the results and giving feedback, and the same for the data scientists, right? And then going back and revising the models, and it becomes this wonderful iterative process. So I've used this from my book. These are key, the key insurance processes. And frankly, as you could take a look at them, a number of these could be used in any industry. So marketing and sales, customer service analytics, financial analytics, provider and supplier analytics, legal analytics. This could apply to any industry. And what I've tried to do is kind of highlight three here that are unique to our industry: the underwriting analytics, our actuarial analytics, and claims analytics, right? So the most important thing we're going to do now is look at the business requirements. Again, as I said, one of my goals is to help you define your business requirements better. If you can define business requirements better, you're way ahead of the game, because then your analytics are much more targeted and refined. So there are a number of ways to do that. Design thinking is one approach. If you're interested in that, if you haven't used it, I can give you some links to a little bit more about design thinking. People talk about customer journeys, but design thinking is all about it's about the emotion of the stakeholder, and how you approach a problem from that emotional perspective, and then address it. Use case narratives have been around for ages. Business discovery interviews can be very effective, but they're very time consuming, and sometimes they're very open-ended. And then the approach that I'm going to share with you today is the analytics actionability framework. So what is it? It's a very simple framework, and it really helps. Number one, we start out with what is your business objective, your overarching business problem that you're trying to solve. And then we look at it from what are your top 2 to 3, maybe sub-objectives, if you will. So relate it to that business problem you're trying to solve. What are 2 to 3 sub-objectives, if you will. If for each of those, what you want to do is say, what business questions do I need to answer to address those objectives? What actions could I take if I could answer those questions? And how would I know that I've moved the needle or made progress? What metrics or KPIs would you need to measure to know that we've made some improvement? And last but not least, the data, right? What's the data that we need to actually to answer those business questions, and to actually create the KPIs, and obviously to enable the actions. So let's look at this in a little bit more context. I'm going to show this analytics actually for an underwriting example. So if, at the end of the day, right, we're trying to improve let's just say our objective is to improve our underwriting profitability, okay? Let's just say there was the overarching objective. And we've got 3 sub-objectives here we want to look at: our risk classification, assessment, pricing, agent customer satisfaction and retention, and associate retention, assuming we're going to improve all of this, right? Let's just take a look at the top one. So what were the business questions or analysis we'd like to, the questions we'd like to ask? What risk segment or classification does the risk of class fall into? What are the exposures for the risk or risk class? What's the loss history for it? How does the risk class fall within our existing underwriting guidelines? Or does it, rather, number one? And if not, can the exposure or the coverage of the price be modified to make it acceptable? What's the proper price? How do we compare to competitors, right? If we could answer those questions, what could we do? We could better plan our strategies on growth and profitability targets. We could align our products better, and we could make better pricing our terms and conditions adjustments based on individual exposures, right, and experience. What can we do now? Then we would measure our measurable results. What are we going to look at? We're going to look at things like, if we're going to look at our target segment and product goals, we're looking at written premiums, policies in force, maybe in profitability. If we're improved risk portfolio profitability, we might look at our loss ratio, the net underwriting profit. And lastly, we could probably also, and this isn't a KPI, it's definitely a result though, we would have updated underwriting guidelines, right? We might modify our underwriting guidelines, right, to better be able to handle some of the things that we're trying to do. And then from a data perspective, you saw some of that. So let's take a look at this from a data perspective. Whoops, okay. which is we want to look in the center at our core metrics, right? These are the things that we can measure, right? These are things that are percentages, dollars, et cetera, accounts you'll see here. And these are, some of the ones. The dimensions are what add color to our metrics, right? So like time, organization, our product, maybe it's producer or distribution, our risk or exposure, and maybe our underwriting methodology. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through the same thing for sales, but I'm going to invite you to go back and take a look at this because I paraphrase the same question and look at these things from a sales perspective, right? About aligning our distribution channels, our agents, et cetera, and some of the, looking at our sales costs, cost to sell, looking at some of the data that we would use for that. And similarly, then we would look at our sales data in terms of the metrics and of the dimensionality. Let me go back up for a second. So there is, and I'm not sure if I put the tool on the back of this, but what you can easily do is you want to take this little framework, basically this little chart, and think about this when you're looking at your objectives and break it down. Try to do it to 3 to begin with. If you need to, you could break this down even finer, right? Then break it down to sub-objectives. But start at this level, and I think you'll find you start to think much more effectively about your analytics. What are the analytics you're trying to define? You're also validating whether the analysis that you're producing is truly actionable. That's the whole point of this actions. What actions could you take and what metrics, right? And then you're validating your data. And some of this, again, I've just used, maybe assuming that this is internal data, you could also take external data or competitor data, right? So let's move to the future. So our world is changing, right? It continues to change. Am I running out of time, Rich?
Yeah, just a time check here. Sorry. We're asking the other session to hold up. So probably if you need 5 minutes, take them.
Okay.
And maybe we can get to a question before.
Yeah. Okay. I'll be real quick. So we're so things are changing, right? So in terms of technology, and again, because many of you mentioned that, we're moving from SMAC, social, mobile, analytics, and cloud to dark, right? So this is, we're talking about, the A is for artificial intelligence. This is for the reality. R is for the reality. Q is for the quantum computing, which is the technology. And D is for the distributed ledger technology. So that's where things are moving. Another time you can take a look at the data and analytics buzzwords. They're all here, all of the big buzzwords that are out there. It's not so much just about the buzzwords, though. It's about what are the reality of them, and it's a big space, right? There's new buzzwords coming up all the time. The more important part here is, what does this mean to you in terms of changing job roles? And there will be fewer traditional jobs. Those that are there may have new titles, right? They may evolve into, new titles or additional roles. So it may not just evolve, right? There may be truly brand new jobs. But what you can definitely see is there'll be more data and analytics jobs. So, more data scientists, more business analysts, more data analysts and statisticians. So I just encourage you to take a look at the continuous learning opportunities, whether it's through the institutes, there's data science programs, Coursera, MOOCs, but also apply it. Look at projects, professional association activities, and non-industry volunteer activities. Just in closing, you now understand, hopefully you understand better what data-driven means. You understand the data analytics literacy elements. We've explored the mindset and skills. Hopefully you have a framework now that can help you better define your requirements. And we've given you some resources for your skills improvement. So Rich, yeah, go to a Q&A, go to the Q, maybe we can take a question or two. Do you want to ask, can you maybe open the Q&A panel, or do we want to open it up for a question?
Questions, and I apologize if I miss one of your questions, folks. First question from Hillary Price. How did giant companies integrate all of their data available for better processes and efficiencies without just adding additional programs? because old archaic systems weren't built for this much change.
Right. Well, all goes back to the data modeling, frankly. You need really good data modeling to bring that data together. So you need a data roadmap, essentially. That's the short answer. There's a long answer to that because it doesn't happen overnight. It's about prioritizing. It's also about prioritizing what data you bring in, and also looking at the age of the data, what's relevant, because if some of it's no longer relevant, why bother spending the effort to do it, right? So some of that's a prioritization process as well. And hopefully that's kind of a glib answer, but hopefully that starts to address it.
Okay, and perhaps on the lighter side, is your book, Pat, available on Amazon or somewhere else?
It is indeed. It is available on Amazon and many places, including Safari, including Pearson's website. And I guess one thing I was going to ask people to say is, and I'd love to hear from you anyway, is, I'd love to hear what you learned today to be able to take to your job. But in here, what you'll see is there is an ability for you to download chapter 1 of the book, which is an overview. And I'm probably hiding that, or maybe not. If you click on this link, you'll be able to download the book. And even if you go to the Pearson website, go to Inform IT, INFOR, informit.com. Search on Applied Insurance Analytics. You'll find a page for my book, and you will see they'll say content example, and you can download chapter 1 free. And if you want to know more about the e-learning showcase, I put a link in here. You can look at that and you can see an introduction to that. And I'd be happy to talk to any of you if you'd like to talk on a one-off basis. So, Rich, sorry, there's always too much more content. I get very excited when I start to talk about the topic.
No, it was great. I wish, we could keep things going, but I know there are other presenters lined up for this.
Absolutely. My apologies. Didn't mean to go long.
Well, Pat, it was great seeing you. Hope you get to enjoy the pool in Florida this afternoon.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for your time. And folks, for the remainder of the sessions, please go to the iDay webpage and access the session from there. Thank you, folks.